America. One of the great sponsors of the program, Americans for Prosperity, wants you to volunteer to be in this election. AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer. Akash Chougule joins me now from inside the Beltway. Akash, how's the response been to the call for people to get involved in election 2024?
It has been enormous, Hugh. I know you and I talked about Pennsylvania. Just to give you one data point, yesterday we knocked our 700,000th door in the state of Pennsylvania. Across 27 states, Hugh, we have hit 17 million doors in almost 600 races across every level, federal, state, local, you name it. Obviously, we could not have done that without enormous volunteer activism. And I think you're seeing that because people understand the emergency of what's at stake this year and next year on politics and policy alike.
We have 5 weeks to go. People can still go to AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer. Akash, what would you like the moderators to ask about the economy tonight? I want them to spend most of the time on commander-in-chief questions, Israel, Russia, China. But if there is one question on the economy, what would you like asked tonight?
What is your simple playbook? What are the 3 steps you are going to take to bring down inflation and reduce the cost of living for American families? I think that has been and continues to be the number one concern, particularly for swing voters in this country. And I don't think we frankly have clarity at all, particularly from Vice President Walz and the Harris campaign, of what they're going to do. And I would like to see Senator Vance really double down on President Trump's successes in that area from the last administration. The tax cuts, extending those individual tax cuts, doubling down on cutting regulations, a lot of the things they did in the past, instead of some of this industrial policy winners and losers things. I'd like to see Vance really understand what Trump did that made the economy so strong in 2019 and do it again.
You know, Akash, sometimes we're tempted to talk about things at a level at which most Americans are not. I just posted that the Israelis are making sure a Falaise Gap does not develop in southern Lebanon. And someone said, what the hell's a Falaise Gap? And it's, a World War II term from 30 days after the invasion of Normandy. I'm not going to take time here. But if they do ask that question, do they risk getting into the minutia that most Americans' eyes will glaze over? How do you avoid the mega effect?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair concern, but I think you can really simplify this, Hugh, right? I think the American people understand that $6 trillion in Democrat overspending drove this inflation crisis. So I think very simply, for example, if Senator Vance can say, we're going to extend your tax cuts, we're going to focus on getting government spending under control, and we're going to make sure that regulations doesn't make things more expensive and more difficult. I think that's really easy for people to understand because it's been done before. We just did this under the Trump administration a few years ago and have seen the exact opposite at play in the Biden administration. I think you can keep that relatively high level and make clear where your priorities are for the American pocketbooks next year and beyond.
What do you think about Kamala Harris keeps saying we have to build 3 million houses. Government does not build a house. If they do, it's usually wildly expensive because they don't know how to do it. But they don't really build houses. They impede the building of houses everywhere. Should that come up? Because, of course, our housing shortage is combining with high interest rates to make it very difficult for young people to buy their first home, et cetera. How do you make that known to the viewing audience of your J.D. Vance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such an important point. I do think this will come up, and I think, frankly, Vice President Walz is probably going to be the one to bring it up. I think J.D. Vance needs to hammer him on the fact that this administration is in control right now and raising costs that we've discussed here, right? They've raised the cost of inputs. They've raised the cost of lumber. They're right now with this port strike that just began, again, going to raise costs for essential materials. And so housing costs, there are a lot of factors that drive it. But I think this administration, of course, has not helped. You talk, again, about state and local regulations that have been a problem. The one thing I'm hopeful that J.D. Vance won't do, because Hugh, it is not correct. It is not correct to say that the immigration problem is driving housing prices. There is a housing shortage in general. Housing prices are going up in general. Immigration influx and saying that we need fewer people in this country is not the answer to our housing crisis. I think that's something he's done in the past, and hopefully he doesn't do that and really stick to pinning the blame on this administration and the failures of Democratic cities and governors and mayors across the country for this crisis in the first place.
You know, Akash, I think he might be tempted to say Jerome Powell, your Federal Reserve Chairman, said at his last press conference when interest rates were cut by half of 1 percentage point that illegal immigration is impacting the labor market. Now, Powell did not say the renters market or the housing market. He said the labor market. Do you agree with Powell?
I do, but I think the point here, especially as it pertains to housing, is actually probably the opposite. We actually saw this take place in Florida when there was that big scare a while back where all of a sudden housing construction came to a screeching halt because workers were fleeing their various counties and all of that. And frankly, in some of these counties, the only reason they even got back, things kind of got going again was because local sheriffs said they weren't going to enforce that order. And so, look, on net, immigration is very, very important to building houses and keeping the price of housing under control for people. I think interest rates and input costs and all these other things, regulations, as we were just discussing, go a lot further in driving the cost of housing for people.
Akash, you don't know how right you are. At least in Southern California, where I did most of my legal work, almost every drywaller in Southern California is a Spanish speaker. And I mean, almost 100%. Akash Chougule, good to talk to you. AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer. Get in the game, America. There's an organization right there that you can go and they will put you to work in a place where the return on your time investment is real. AmericansForProsperity.org/volunteer. Hour 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show straight ahead. Stay tuned.